guys, and welcome back to another video, and today I am back with another True Crime Tuesday. But before we get into today's video, I just want to do the usual. My name's Amber and I upload beauty, fashion and lifestyle content, and on a Tuesday I like to throw in a little bit of true crime. So if that is the type of videos that you like to watch, then why not hit that subscribe button and come along and join my little family. And if you're already part of the family, then make sure that notification bell switched on just so you're notified of whenever I upload a video. Why not give me a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below. So guys, just before we get into the video, I like to do a little bit of a disclaimer. I do not mean any disrespect to anyone mentioned in this video. I've literally just gone online and compiled together all of the information to bring this case to you guys for educational purposes. And also I also like to quickly disclaim that obviously this is a true crime case. Sometimes it can be a little bit gruesome and grisly. If that is not the type of thing that you want to watch, it has got adult content, then just click off this video, and there are plenty of other videos available on my channel that will probably be more suitable to you. But now we can get into today's case, and today's case is another serial killer. It's another male serial killer, and he is called Rodney Alcala, and he is also known as the dating game killer, and we will get into why he's known as the dating game killer a little bit later on in this video. Rodney James Alcala is a convicted rapist and serial killer who committed several murders between 1977 and 1979 across the United States of America. People do believe that he could have murdered hundreds of women, but there are only a few cases that have actually been confirmed, and he's often labelled the dating game killer due to the fact that he did have an appearance in 1978 on an American television show called The Dating Game, which was actually in the very midst of his killing spree. So Rodney was born Rodrigo Jacques Alcala Bucua in San Antonio, Texas, to Rahul Alcala Bucar and Ana Marie Gutierrez. Really bad at pronouncing names, I do apologise about that. He and his sisters were raised by his mother in suburban Los Angeles, but his father did abandon the family. He joined the United States Army in 1960, where he served as a clerk. In 1964, after what was described as a nervous breakdown, he was diagnosed with an antisocial personality disorder by military psychiatrist and discharged on medical grounds. Other diagnoses later proposed by various psychiatric experts at his trials included narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, a malignant narcissism with psychopathy, and sexual sadism comorbidities. Rodney, who claims to have a genius-level IQ, graduated from the UCLA School of Fine Arts after his medical discharge from the Army, and he later attended New York University using the alias John Berger, where he studied film under Roman Polanski. So Rodney went on to commit his first crime in 1968. A motorist in Los Angeles actually noticed that he was luring this young 8-year-old girl into his Hollywood apartment, and this girl was called Tali Shapiro. The girl was found in the apartment, raped and beaten with a steel bar, but Rodney actually managed to escape the scene. So then Rodney decided that he was going to flee to the East Coast, because obviously there was a warrant out for his arrest, and he enrolled in the NUY school using the name John Berger. During the summer months, he also managed to obtain a counselling job, how crazy, at a Hampshire arts school camp for children using a slightly different alias, John Berger. So they pronounce the same but spelled differently. So the original alias he used was John Berger, which was Berger, and then the second one was spelt burger as in a hamburger to eat. And then in June 1971, Cornelia Michael Criley, a 23-year-old TWA flight attendant, was found raped and strangled in her Upper East Side Manhattan apartment. Her murder remained unsolved until 2011, when it was then linked to Rodney. So then in 1971, he was actually included on the FBI's most wanted list, and two children who attended the art school where he was a counsellor actually noticed his face on an FBI poster in the post office and instantly recognised him. Rodney was then soon arrested and extradited to California. By then, Shapiro's parents, who's the girl that he attacked, they had relocated their full family to Mexico, and they actually refused to allow her to stand at his trial. They didn't want her to testify, basically. They were unable to convict him of rape and attempted murder without their primary witness, and the prosecutors were forced to permit Rodney to plead guilty to a lesser charge of assault, so he actually got away with rape. So Rodney was then paroled after 17 months in 1974 under the Intermediate Sentencing Programme, which was popular at the time. It basically allowed parole boards to release offenders as soon as they demonstrated evidence of rehabilitation. So it was giving these people who'd committed crimes a chance to rehabilitate themselves, which, you know, it is great, but then you do get people like this who ruin it for people who do actually want to change their lives. Obviously he went on to be an absolute destructive force and murdered God knows how many women that we don't even know about. So literally less than 2 months after his release, he actually was rearrested because he went on to assault a 13-year-old girl who was identified in court records as Julie J. She'd accepted a ride to school from him, and then he'd obviously assaulted her. He was then paroled after serving 2 years of an intermediate sentence. So this guy's been given 2 chances at rehabilitation and both times has reoffended, which is just ridiculous. So in 1977, after Rodney's second release, his Los Angeles parole officer took the unusual step of permitting a repeat offender and known flight risk the opportunity to travel to New York City. The NYPD cold case investigators now believe that a week after arriving in Manhattan, Rodney killed Eileen Jane Hoover, a 23-year-old daughter of the owner of the popular Hollywood nightclub Securos and goddaughter of Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. Her remains were found buried on the grounds of the Rockefeller estate in Westchester County. So then in the 1970s, as I did mention earlier on, Rodney did kill Cornelia Crilley, 23, and Ellen Hoover, 23, both residents of New York City. Crilley was raped and strangled in her own stockings in her apartment in June 1971, and Hoover disappeared on July 15, 1977, leaving behind a calendar that stated she was meeting with a John Berger. Rodney pleaded guilty to these murders in 2012 and he received a sentence of 25 years to life. Though he was actually on the sex offenders register, he actually managed to land a job with the Los Angeles Times as a typesetter in September 1977, and his past conviction for sexual assault prompted California police to interview Rodney in March 1978 as a potential suspect in the Hillside Strangling killings, another set of serial murders that occurred in California in the 1970s. Rodney was cleared of those crimes and the police did not realise that they had actually spoken with a different serial killer. So during this period, Rodney actually managed to convince dozens of young men and women that he was a fashion photographer, so he could take their pictures to put in his portfolio, was basically the angle he was going with. One of his co-workers who worked at the Times newspaper with him actually recalled that Rodney had shared these photos with her and the other workmates, and she actually said, "I thought it was weird, but I was young. I didn't know anything," she said. "When I asked why he took the photos, he said their mums asked him to. I remember the girls were naked." And then there was another woman who later went on to say she was actually persuaded by Rodney to model for him in 1979, and she said that he'd said he was a professional, so in my mind I was being a model for him. The portfolio also included spread after spread of naked teenage boys, she said. Most of the photos were sexually explicit and most of the people in the images remain unidentified. Police actually fear that a lot of these women and men that were in these pictures could actually be other victims of Rodney's. And then in 1979, according to a later trial testimony, Rodney actually knocked unconscious and raped a 15-year-old girl called Monique Hoyt while she was posing for photographs. So it just does make you wonder how many other girls has he taken advantage of, or even boys, while he's been photographing them. So then in 1978, and this is where Rodney got his name, the dating game killer, from, he was a contestant on the popular game show The Dating Game. Host Jim Lange introduced him as a successful photographer, which just makes my skin absolutely crawl at the fact that he was taking advantage of these men and women and taking photos of them in the most sexually explicit positions. Is just like, it's disgusting. He got his start when his father found him in the dark room at the age of 13, fully developed. Between takes you might find him skydiving or motorcycling. At the time he was a convicted child molester, but the show didn't actually run any background checks, so it didn't come up that he was a child molester. Now these days that's highly unlikely that you would get away with getting on a show with any sort of reputation or background like that, because they do like proper checks. and actually it wouldn't surprise me if due to incidences like this that they are more thorough now than ever. So when asked by Cheryl Bradshaw, who was actually the girl that he won the date with, what kind of meal he'd be, he responded to say, "I'm the banana. I look really good, peel me." Rodney's use of charm and innuendo won him a date with Cheryl. However, when they met face to face, she didn't feel fully comfortable with Rodney and she never actually went on a date with him. She found that he was acting like really creepy, and she opted not to go out with him. And you know, thank God for that, because God knows what might have happened to her if they'd have gone out together. Like, that could have ended seriously bad for her. There was also another contestant on the show who was a fellow bachelor at the time. He went on to describe Rodney as a very strange guy with bizarre opinions. And then criminal profiler Pat Brown also noted that Rodney killed at least 3 women after his appearance on the dating game, and he speculated that the rejection from Cheryl might actually be a exuberating factor. Pat Brown actually said one wonders what this did to his mind. Serial killers don't do well with rejection, and they think that are wrong and rejected, that it's the girl's fault and that the girl's done wrong, and they think that, you know, he basically thought he'd been played by Cheryl and that she was just playing hard to get. So this could have like turned some cogs in his head. Then we go on to his next victim, and this young girl was called Rob Zamso, and she was a 12-year-old girl from Huntington Beach, and she disappeared somewhere between the beach and her ballet class on June 20th, 1979. Her decomposing body was then found 12 days later in the Los Angeles foothills, and Robin's friends told police that a stranger had approached them on the beach asking them to take their pictures. Detectives circulated a sketch of the photographer, and Rodney's parole officer instantly recognised him. During a search of Rodney's mother's house in Monterey Park, police found a rental receipt for a storage locker in Seattle, and when they actually opened the locker up, it contained Robin's earrings. He was convicted of these charges in 1980, and 4 years later this was actually overturned because the jury had been improperly informed about Rodney's past criminal record, and another trial in 1986 resulted in a second guilty verdict, but in 2001 this was also overturned on a technicality. I can't imagine being Robin's family. It must have been absolutely awful to go through this. Do you know what? We've got our daughter's killer dead to rights, and then to have the case overturned on several occasions. It must have been absolutely horrendous. Before Rodney was retried for a 3rd time for Robin's death, advances in the world of DNA and other crime scene analysis provided evidence tying him to more crimes. He'd been forced to provide a sample. At his next trial, which took place in 2010, Rodney again was charged with killing Robin, and part of the case against him was the pair of gold earrings that they'd found. Rodney basically tried to claim that the earrings were his, and that if you look back at clips, such as clips of him in the dating game, that he was already wearing gold earrings in 1978, but it didn't convince the jury. So in addition to these charges for Robin's murder, he actually faced charges for assaulting and strangling 4 women in California in the late 1970s. 18-year-old Jill Barkham, who was killed in November 1977, 27-year-old Georgia Wickstead, who was raped and beaten and strangled in December 1978, and there was also 32-year-old Charlotte Lamb, who was killed in June 1978, and 21-year-old Jill Parentio, who was killed in June 1979. Rodney opted to represent himself during the court proceedings. In February 2010, he was actually found guilty of all 5 of these murders, and he was sentenced to death in March 2010. So in 2010, Seattle police named Rodney as a person of interest in the unsolved murders of Annette Whitaker, 13, in July 1977, and Joyce Gaunt, 17, in February 1978. Then in March 2011, investigators in Marin County, California, north of San Francisco, announced that they were confident that Rodney was responsible for the 1977 murder of 19-year-old Pamela Jean Lamson, who had disappeared after making a trip to Fisherman's Wharf to meet a man who offered to photograph her. Her battered, naked body was subsequently found in Marin County near a hiking trail. With no fingerprints or usable DNA, charges are unlikely to file, but police claim that there is sufficient evidence to convince them that Rodney did commit this crime. Then in September 2016, Rodney was also charged with the murder of 28-year-old Christine Ruth Thornton, who disappeared in 1977. In 2013, a relative recognised her as a subject of one of Rodney's photos. Her body was found in Sweetwater County, Wyoming in 1982, but was not identified until 2015, when DNA supplied by Thornton's relatives matched tissue samples from her remains. Rodney admitted to taking her photo, but not to after killing the woman who was approximately 6 months pregnant at the time of her death. That is just horrific. Thornton is the first alleged murder victim linked to Rodney's photos, which were made public in 2010. Rodney was reportedly too ill to make the journey from California to Wyoming to stand trial on the new charges. He remains in California State Prison pending further appeals of his death sentences. However, DNA collected at the crime scene was too degraded to test, so he was not charged with the crime. So following Rodney's arrest, going back a little bit to those photos, when he was arrested in July 1979 is when they actually found hundreds and hundreds of the photos in the Seattle storage locker that he had, and they do think that some of these images could be of other victims, and they were very explicit photos. So in March 2010, Huntington Beach, CA and New York's police department released 120 of Rodney's photographs, and they sought the public's help in identifying the people in the photos. Basically, they were trying to identify if any of the women or the children he'd photographed were additional victims of his. Approximately 900 of the photos, there was a 900 additional photos that weren't released, were that sexually explicit that the police could not release them to the public, which is just horrific. In the first few weeks, police reported that approximately 21 women had come forward to identify themselves, and at least 6 families said they believed they recognised loved ones who disappeared years ago and were never found. I just find this whole thing just so saddening, because there's probably so many cold cases that are actually Rodney's doing that were never ever solved. It's just awful. So none of the photos unequivocally connected to a missing person case or unsolved murder until 2013, when a family member recognised the photo of Christine Thornton, who I was talking about earlier. As of September 2019, 109 of the original photos remain posted online, and the police continue to solicit the public's help with any further identifications. Now, if I can find the website where these photos are, I will leave a link to it down below, because I don't know who's watching this video, but there might be someone in this video who's had a family member go missing way back when, that this could be linked to your family member, and if we can get someone else identified, that would be great. It could put another family at rest, so I will link those down below if I can. So Rodney's exact death toll is unknown. Like I say, it's thought to be in the hundreds. Some of the authorities believe he's murdered around 50 people, where others believe he could have murdered around 130. He remains on death row to this day, and he will probably, if not die on death row, die in prison, because he's quite old now. I just think this guy is just absolutely insane, and I think it's crazy that he was given the opportunity to rehabilitate himself twice, and on both occasions he went on to murder God knows how many people. I just think it's absolutely awful. I'd love to know if you've heard about this case and what your thoughts and feelings are on this case. Just let me know that down below, and if you've got any case suggestions for me, feel free to pop them in the comment box down below also. Anyway guys, I hope you've enjoyed watching this video, and I shall see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching.